Today is Saturday, October the 13th, 2018. We are at the Community Media Center in Westminster, Maryland. I am Gary Livengood, and I'm interviewing Alan Yeater from, what's your hometown?
With a T now, Yeater, not Jaeger.
Oh, okay. What's your hometown, Alan?
My hometown is McClure, Pennsylvania, population 1,000.
Okay.
It's in Snyder County, which, have you ever heard of Susquehanna University in Bucknell? It's in that area.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Susquehanna University is in the east end of the county, and my little hometown is right at the west end of the county. In fact, it was called, the high school was called the West Snyder High School because in the west, but it's now an elementary school because they merged West Snyder High School with Middleburg High School. So there's two high schools in the county.
Okay. So we're going to be talking about Alan's experiences, particularly in the military and his service. But what branch of service were you in?
Army.
And your rank?
I was a captain when I got out.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when did you enter the service?
I entered the service in the end of November 1968. I was an Army ROTC at Penn State. So when I graduated in June, I got my degrees, plus I was commissioned, but I didn't go on active duty until November '68. I went to Fort Benning. I was in military. The way they did it then, you got three choices of branches. So one of them had to be a combat branch, like infantry or artillery or armor. So I selected, I think Army engineers was one. But I got one of the branches I wanted, which was military intelligence. But at that time, all military intelligence officers had to go to the basic course of one of the combat arms. So I was sent to Fort Benning to take the platoon leaders course. But, I forgot to tell you, when I graduated, they offered me a regular commission, which would have meant 5 years active duty, and I didn't know whether I liked the Army or not, even though I wanted to be in the Army. So I said, no, I better take the reserve commission, which is 2 years active duty, and then like 4 years in the reserves. But as soon as I got my orders putting me on active duty in November '68, it said I was going to go to the Army Intelligence School after finishing the stuff at Fort Benning. And I've been to be in combat intelligence, and they had me going to Vietnam in '69. And this was the James Bond movies that come out, so I always wanted to be a James Bond type, right? So I wanted counterintelligence. Well, the Army's smart. They came down, the personnel came down and spoke to all the MI officers that had taken the platoon leaders course and said, how would you like a better assignment? We'll give it to you, but you must go voluntary indefinite, which means you stay in the Army as long as we need you and as long as you want to stay in. So I said, I'll take it. So then I got my counterintelligence assignment after finishing the platoon leaders course. So I finished the counterintelligence course at Fort Holabird, Maryland, which is now a Baltimore Industrial Center. The only thing left there is the Officers Club, which is very small. But that is now the home of the Vietnam Veterans of America, for the local chapter.
Okay. And when did you leave Holabird? What year?
I left. Well, actually, I don't know. I guess they didn't have an opening in Vietnam for me at that time, so they signed me to the intelligence school. I was with the Field Training Exercise Committee. Believe it or not, they had a Vietnamese village constructed down at around Fort Howard in the woods, and it looked like a Vietnamese village, and they would take students down there who were taking counterintelligence and interviewing and interrogations and stuff, and they had booby traps set up so they'd fall down and things. Nobody would get hurt, but they'd have to interview people dressed like Vietnamese. That's what I did. And then I finally went to, I got orders for Vietnam, but before I went to Vietnam, they sent me to Fort Bliss, El Paso, Texas. That's where Fort Bliss is. And they had a Vietnamese language school at the Biggs Airfield, which was right outside Fort Bliss. And so I took 3 months of Vietnamese language training. It was a very good course, 6 hours a day for 3 months. You'd have weekends off. But then I went to Vietnam, and typical Army, they send me, I arrived in Vietnam just a few days before Christmas. You know, they can't wait to be home for Christmas. So I got in Vietnam right before Christmas in 1970.
Okay, so, and when you got there, you were fluent in Vietnamese?
No.
Not?
No, in fact, no, I mean, I wasn't very fluent at all.
Not very?
No.
Okay. Well,
But anyhow, what's funny, I knew I was going to be I was in the Phoenix program. That's why they had all these intelligence officers. They need a lot of intelligence officers. Phoenix program was a program, well, they had reduced troops in Vietnam at that time. One time they had 530,000 American troops. In 1969, when President Nixon came into office, we started Vietnamization. The idea, he was going to end the war by turning the war over to the Vietnamese, with more training for them, and he also, so they had those who were involved in that with the actual Vietnamese military. But I was involved in pacification, which is getting the people to support the government. And the Phoenix program was a very controversial program. In fact, I was there for the whole year of 1971. They held congressional hearings about the Phoenix program, and all those who were opposed to it said it was an assassination program. But it wasn't while I was there. I think it was used by the Vietnamese government to probably eliminate some of the people who were opposed to their government. They would say, he's VC, he goes to jail. Or
now, where were you stationed?
I was stationed in the Mekong Delta. I don't know if you're familiar with Vietnam, but they have a small section of Cambodia sticks down into the Mekong area. It's called the Parrots Beak. Looks like the Parrots Beak. I was right on the west side of the Parrots Beak, very close to Cambodia.
Yeah, Laos and Cambodia, and Parrots Beak into
Comes
Saigon.
down from Cambodia.
Yeah.
Mekong River comes down. The Mekong area is many tributaries of the Mekong River. It's very wet. A lot of French had built a lot of canals. And
Were you affiliated with the 9th Infantry at that point?
no. It wasn't when I arrived in Vietnam. It had been down to 250,000 Americans. I don't think there wasn't an American fighting unit in the Delta at all. I think there was a helicopter unit, because I got involved with them one time, but there was no fighting going on with American troops fighting in Vietnamese. There was Americans with Vietnamese military units, when they would fight, but no American units.
And again, what year did you arrive there?
Right before Christmas in 1970, and was there for the whole year of 71. Left in December of 71.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the Phoenix program was started by the CIA, and it was part of the CORDS program. And when I was there, I think the former head of the CIA was involved with this CORDS program. Might have been in charge of it. CORDS stands for Civil Organization and Rural Development Support. So, Phoenix program was part of that. They also had Chuhoi program, which tried to get the VC and North Vietnamese soldiers to come to our side, to the Vietnamese side. That was Chuhoi. They also had rural development support soldiers who wear black uniforms, and they go out to all the villages and help the villages with the cleanliness and planning things, and try to get the village or the hamlet to favor the South Vietnamese government. But the Phoenix program, there were 44 provinces in Vietnam, and they were divided into districts. When I first got to Vietnam, and when I was west of the Parrots Beak, I was in the town of Muc Qua, which was then a town of it was on a river, on a tributary of the Mekong, so they had a Navy unit there with a Navy advisor with patrol boats. And the town was no electricity at that time, and one main street, but no paved roads. And we had an advisory team. It was called Advisory Team 85, which was headed by an Army colonel. So when I got there was maybe a little over 100 guys in the team. It was like a little fort with towers at each end. In the Phoenix program, each province had a province advisor, and then each district had a lieutenant. But since I'm a captain, But since they didn't have a major, I held the major spot until they finally got a major in front of about 4 or 5 months. So, but the idea was each Phoenix office would have members of the Vietnamese military, their secret service, all the organizations the Vietnamese had, all collecting intelligence on who this Viet Cong infrastructure in all the hamlets, the infrastructure, who's the Vietnamese, or the Viet Cong mayor and the Viet Cong tax collector and all this kind of stuff. And supposedly when you had 3 different sources of information saying this guy was a VC tax collector, then you could go out and arrest him. Before I got there, there was a lot of shooting involved because a lot of times they resisted. But the word was out by President Nixon, no American casualty. We don't hold the casualties out. So they actually didn't. They had a lot of operations where Americans didn't go out on operations with them because they wanted to hold down casualties. Yeah.
So, did you find that time rewarding in any way?
Yeah, I like the Vietnamese people. You know, it's unfortunate that a lot of Americans who didn't have any rank and really didn't know what was going on with the war. You know, if you were drafted or something, they hated the Vietnamese. They didn't like them. They didn't trust them because you didn't know who the enemy was. I mean, nobody wore uniforms. Mm-hmm. But I had let's see, two Vietnamese secretaries. They spoke a little English. One came over here in 1975 as one of the refugees when I think about 1 million left, and when the communists took over in '75. Yeah, so I like working with the Vietnamese and going out to the little villages, and you know, very, very primitive. But after they finally got a major in, they moved me down to a town called APBAC, APBAC. And I was always wondering, because APBAC is it's a very famous war from 1963. It was the first war in which we only had advisors there, but John Paul Van, who's famous in Vietnam, he was a colonel then, and he was advising a military unit of the Vietnamese Army, and they had several Vietnamese Army units engage a large VC unit, and they had shot down like 5 helicopters, and the VC really looked good. And at this time, the reports going to Congress were, well, the Vietnamese Army is doing real well, we're going, no problem. But this was indication we weren't doing very well. So, and he eventually left, retired from the Army, and he went back as an advisor, and he had the rank actually of like a lieutenant general. He controlled one of the 4 corps areas in Vietnam. The I Corps, Second Corps, Third, and Fourth. He was in charge of I Corps, so he actually was in charge of all the military there and all the civilians working. And I briefed him one time, but he was killed in a helicopter crash in 1972. He's buried at Arlington. They wrote a book about him.
Shot down or just malfunction?
It wasn't shot. They don't think it was shot down. Just crashed.
Okay.
Bad weather.
So after you left in '71, I think.
Yeah, I left in December '71.
You stayed in the service, I
Yeah,
assume.
that's what I heard. I was assigned to 18th Airborne Corps, and so I had to get down to Fort Bragg, and I didn't realize I was not a very gung-ho infantry type. I was MI, and I didn't realize that Fort Bragg is the home of the airborne. And the 18th Airborne Corps was created in 1944, with Matthew Ridgway was the commanding officer of the 18th Airborne. It was a glider unit then. So I went down there and had to report to the 18th Airborne Corps headquarters, which controls now. In fact, it controls 4 divisions. It controls the 82nd Airborne Division, which is down at Fort Bragg. There's like 20,000, 22,000 men. Well, Fort Bragg is the largest Army base for personnel. I think they got 50 or 60,000 soldiers there. And it controls the 101st Airborne at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, the 10th Mountain Division at Fort Drum, New York, and the 3rd Infantry Division at Fort Stewart, Georgia. So anyhow, I go in there not knowing that you know, it's just about everybody's airborne. If you're not airborne, they call you a leg, you know, which is not bad. So I'm in there, and a colonel, lieutenant colonel comes in to interview me, and he had changed from infantry. He had like 2 tours in Vietnam with the infantry, and he had got about a few medals. He was like a little Patton, I think. And one of the first things he said to me is, "When are you going airborne?" Well, I about fell out of my seat because I didn't realize. I said, "Eesh." They were interviewing for somebody to run the counterintelligence section, and I guess they're desperate for somebody, so they took me. And I said, "Well, give me a chance." When I went to the unit, I saw these guys who I thought were old, maybe the early 30s, jumping out of airplanes and getting $100 a month extra. I said, "Well, I can do that too." So I went to airborne school in '72. Yeah.
Any trepidation about going airborne?
Yeah, yeah, it's dangerous. They usually average about, let's see, I started, well, I run the 18th Airborne Corps Association, actually, and I belong to the 82nd Airborne Association because they're open to any Army paratrooper. So I joined that, and one time I went to a festival in Atlanta called the All Airborne Awards, and it's a 3-day affair, and they would take several buses of the people there down to Fort Benning, which is only a 2-hour drive away. And they have at Fort Benning, they have the Airborne Walk. It's a beautiful, enormous monument, which with a concrete small fence around it. And inside the fence, they have monuments, similar monuments to all the American airborne units. And there's 20-some there when I was there, and I was wondering why I didn't have one for the 18th Airborne Corps. You know, it was still going strong since World War II. And so I got talking to somebody who had tried it once before, and he wasn't successful, so he gave me the information I had, and I sent out letters to all the people that I could get a hold of to see if they wanted to be members. And I ended up getting an association about 150 guys with a lot of generals in it. You know, so. And the last 12 years, let's see, I go down to Fort Bragg about once or twice a year. Once is for the 18th Airborne Corps NCO and Soldier of the Year, which they have competitions in these divisions and brigades, you know, and they select, so there may be 20 people competing for the title, and we give them an award. We give $200 to each NCO and each soldier, and our award is named after Command Sergeant Major Tadeusz Goita, who was he retired. His last assignment, he had 35 years in the Army. His last assignment was the Command Sergeant Major of the 18th Airborne Corps, which is probably, he was in the highest ranking NCO of maybe not for 90,000 guys, you know. He was in the running for Sergeant Major of the Army, but he didn't make it. But he has an interesting story. He was a teenager in Poland when the Germans invaded. And he and his family hid in the woods for several months, but they were finally captured and sent to Germany as slave laborers. So he was a slave laborer in Germany, and when finally in 1945, when the American Army unit freed him, and he was so impressed with the American Army soldiers, he said, "I'm going to be one of them one of these days." So he made it to the U.S. in a couple of years and joined the Army and right up the ranks. And he's written a book, which we give to the winners, called "I Love America," and it's his story of, you know, him being a slave labor in Germany and his progress in the Army.
Well, how long did you stay in the Army?
About almost 5 years.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, unfortunately, being involuntary indefinite, you know, when the Vietnam War ended they pulled all American troops out in '73. Quickly cut the Army in half. The Army was 1.5 million men, so it didn't take them too long until they cut the Army in half, and all those who were involundefinite we don't need you anymore. So yeah, they were nice about it. I got to go in and meet a brigadier general, and I said, "All right, well, we don't like to do this, but we got to let you go because we have no need for you." So then I worked for Pinkerton for a little bit, Pinkerton Detective Agency here in Baltimore, and I was I could tell you some good stories about that, but I was in training to be a supervisor of investigators from Pinkerton. But then the problem with the Arabs, let's see, I guess it was the Yom Kippur War. They won in 1973, I think it was. Yeah, I forget when the Arabs invaded suddenly and had Israel in trouble for a while. But then, so a lot of the Arab oil countries stopped producing oil. We couldn't get any gasoline. So I lived in Joppatown at that time in Harford County. To get gas, you would have to put your car in line the night before at the gas station, you know. So they couldn't promote me to a supervisor. So I ended up joining the police department.
And
That was in '74. I joined the police department. I got out of the Army in about September '73.
the police department in Baltimore?
Yeah, Baltimore City. Yeah,
Baltimore City. And you were with them for how long?
30 years. Yeah,
30.
yeah.
Okay. And your rank?
Oh, I
When you
finally
left there?
finally made sergeant after I was a sergeant the last 13 years. But I was in the Western District where this is really bad. It's a very poor area. That's where the riots began in 2015 that I had in Baltimore. And the police was surrounded. And now the Baltimore Police Department is under they had the Federal Justice Department come in there, investigate the police department and everything. And they said that the Baltimore Police Department was brutal and racist, but really, I never saw any of that when I was working in the worst district. We had a black commander. We worked with black officers. No, I never saw any racism. But anyhow, so now Baltimore Police Department is really in bad shape. Although, let's see, yesterday I saw we're only, in the Baltimore Sun, only about 12% of the people who took the sergeant's test, you have to take a written test first. And then if you pass the test, you go to interviews. But only 12% passed the test, which is, they didn't say what it normally is, but they're very upset about that. And they found an officer drunk in his car a few days ago. So they've had,
Have
a lot of
their
problems.
issues.
They're
huh?
looking for a new police commissioner.
Oh, my. Well,
Well, the crime is so bad in Baltimore. In fact, a couple weeks ago, I guess last year, 2017, Baltimore had the highest per capita murder rate of any city in the U.S., because homicides have really gone down in New York City. They're not in Chicago, but Baltimore only has 615,000 people compared to New York City with 8 million in the city, and Chicago and Philadelphia. So per capita wise, since 17, it was the worst. When I worked during the 90s, we never had less than 300 murders a year. And then they brought a made a new commissioner. They brought him down from New York City. He had been a high-ranking officer in New York City, and he was a commissioner. And so his first year there, we went under 300 for the first time in 10 years. Because he was really an aggressive guy. And the commissioner we had before was more interested, and he put two police officers to all of the recreation centers in Baltimore, and we had 50,000 warrants to serve, and he only had a warrant squad of one sergeant, maybe 5 men trying to serve all these, the minor warrants. But the new commissioner came in, he pulled all the officers out of the rec centers and enlarged the warrant squad, and really made a big difference.
now, when did you leave the police department?
In 30 June 2004.
2004. And do you stay involved in
Yeah,
any?
I still belong to the FOP and the Retired Baltimore Police Association. Yeah.
Okay.
But I don't go to a lot of meetings, but
Right.
yeah.
So, all right, I understand how your military service initiated. It was through the ROTC, right?
Yeah, but listen to this. I have a very unusual police. While I was going through the process of becoming a Baltimore police officer, I got a call from Internal Affairs. Said, we would like to see you. So I went to Internal Affairs investigates other police. And they saw that I had done counterintelligence in the Army. So they said, how would you like to work for us before you go to the police academy? And I agreed. And so I went down to the city hall and was sworn in. And I had no training as a police officer or anything. I did that for a year and a half. A lot of surveillances with cars that couldn't be I used a car that couldn't be traced to anybody, and oh boy. I can tell you some good stories there too.
but with internal affairs.
Yeah, with internal affairs. Yeah. And then after a year and a half of that, I went to the police academy. And I don't know how, but nobody in the police department, there's one person in the Baltimore Police Department knows who are the undercover people are working for them. But when I did my training, I was in the Eastern District with an officer, and he's a trainer. And we were working a midnight shift, and he said, so are you spying on me? And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I know a guy had my number. Everybody has a number. I don't know how he got it. But I found out. And I said, no. But the next day when I reported in for the training, I was told, well, you have to report back to the education department. They decided they didn't want me all raised a big stink. The guys they got in a lot of trouble for that. But then they sent me to another district, the Central District, for training.
Okay. Well, what's your remembrances of your time in the military and its value relative to you?
Well, I like the military because I'm still involved with the military.
Yeah.
I run the 18th Airborne Corps Association. I do a quarterly newsletter, which is usually 18 pages. I read the Washington Post. Here's what I read at home: Washington Post, New York Times, Baltimore Sun, USA Today, Frederick News Post, Carroll County Times. I used to get a weekly paper from all 4 divisions of the Corps, but most of them I get on a computer now. And I also subscribe to the Fayetteville Observer, I get that by computer. That's quite a good paper. That's the one in Fayetteville, right outside Fort Bragg. And, I think the military, that's the problem. I don't know if you know, but last year in 2017, the Army did not reach their quota of volunteers. I think we need a draft because the way the Army is now, those who come with families with money and they have no interest in the military and they're not going to serve. So now you have a military of a lot of people from the South who like the military more than other areas and some lower income, but some middle class. But it's not really fair. I think they ought to have a draft. Maybe half the Army should be drafted and the other half could be volunteers. I don't know.
Introducing the draft again, might
Yeah,
that be an issue?
Yeah, that would be an issue. And I think they started the draft in 1973. Yeah, it would be an issue, but it might prevent us from. Look, we've been in Afghanistan for 17 years now.
And then you look at countries like, Israel, who everybody is required to.
Yeah, I know, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
Personally,
Uh-huh.
military benefited you, I assume.
Yeah, well, actually, I used it got the veterans of a loan from the Veterans Department. I guess being a veteran for my first house, that was cheap, very reasonable loan. Yeah, it gives you a lot of training. You won't be late for meetings and.
Well, what kinds of things have I overlooked that you'd like to address?
Well, I went back to Vietnam 6 years ago to see how things have changed. So.
You did? Where'd you go?
Well, I went with another Penn Stater who actually he wasn't Army ROTC, but he ended up being drafted. But then he went to OCS. That's what you can you can become an officer that way. So he went to OCS and he retired from the Army as a colonel. He lives in Springfield, outside Washington. Since he retired, he had one tour in Vietnam several years in the 82nd. But he has a travel agency. Twice I was supposed to go with his group, but there didn't enough people. So finally he said, look, I better take you myself. So he and I went to Vietnam. It was a 3-week tour. We started in Hanoi and stayed in all the famous hotels in Hanoi and worked our way down 2 flights in the country to Vietnamese Airlines. And what a change after 40-some years. God.
Mm-hmm.
Like Saigon, for example, when I was there, maybe had a population of 2 or 3 million. Most of it was the refugees living in very shabby-looking houses around the city because of the war. But Vietnam, Saigon or Ho Chi Minh City now has 7 or 8 million or more. just traffic is unbelievable. It's mostly motorbikes. So I was walking around. I said, how am I going to cross the street without a red light? I mean, there are red lights, but I said, you just have to start walking and they will go around you because they can't go that fast. But I don't know, they have a population problem in Vietnam. Population now, Vietnam is, when I was there, was like 5 or 6 years ago, it was 90 million. And it's not that big a country. I don't know what they're going to do. They've built a lot of nice beach resorts because they have a 1,000-mile section of the South China Sea there where they're, yeah, I don't know. They'll have a problem. In fact, the Vietnamese government knows that. In fact, they have an American English paper, you know, because there's so many tourists there now from Australia, New Zealand, the Russians. And the paper had an article saying we'd have to do something about population. But the brightest thing in Vietnam, it's a communist country, they are really bearing down. If you criticize the government in any way, if anybody hears you, you'll be in jail. Then when I got there, they had, I think, 40 Vietnamese in jail for criticizing the government. You can't be opposed to the Communist Party. And every town has a large, nice government building, and right beside it is the Communist Party building. So it's just like China.
Well, anything else that
No.
I'm missing?
No.
Well, sir, I certainly appreciate your time, and I certainly appreciate your service.
Okay,
And thank you very much.
All right, thank you.